everybody for joining. We're really happy to have you all here today as part of our Anticipation Hub Community Conversation series. Today, Erin Coughlan de Perez, she is a lead author of the IPCC report, which just got launched on the 28th of February on Monday. And we're going to be having a conversation with her together with Pablo Suarez from the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Centre. And they're going to be digesting all of this latest science from that report and what that means for anticipatory action. And just to give you a tiny bit of background on the Anticipation Hub Community Conversation series, so we've just launched it. At the Anticipation Hub, we have over 88 different partners from across the Red Cross Red Crescent Network, universities, research institutes, NGOs, governments, UN agencies, you name it, we have it in the Anticipation Hub partnership. And we want this series to bring together those different partners and act as a space for them to exchange and discuss with all the different actors interested in anticipatory action. And this is complementing our other range of exchange through the Anticipation Hub, our dialogue platforms, our working groups, our community directory, and I'll tell you a bit more about them at the very end of the session as well. And yeah, first maybe a very quick poll. So I just wanted to get a feeling for who's in the room. So this should now be popping up. Please let me know if it's not. But just to get a feeling for if we're having a lot of practitioners in the room, government, research, other. Great. I see lots are adding. Just give it another second. Super. 25 more people. Fill it in. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay, interesting. So we have about 64% practitioners here today. A few from government, more from research, and a few others. So really interesting to understand the audience that we have here today. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Pablo to facilitate our discussion with Erin.
Thank you so much, Lydia. Hello, friends. Greetings from Boston. My name is Pablo Suarez, and I am very happy to be joining this community conversation convened by the Anticipation Hub. If you're here, it's because you care about Anticipation Hub and you showed up to this particular event because we have Erin to share with us what we now know from the science. So we're going to start honoring the title of this series, the community conversation, by having a community conversation. It's going to be a little bit unconventional. As some of you know, I'm an innovation lead at the Climate Center, and I like to create playful activities to get to know about each other and what's in our heads and what's in our muscles. So we're going to play a little game called I Think, We Think, which is to learn what each of us thinks and what other people think in a playful way, and there will be winners and losers. So I'm going to share with you a little link here. If you click there, you should be opening a browser window and you should see a blue screen that says, welcome to I Think, We Think. Give me a thumbs up if that works, and type your name, can be your real name or a nickname, whatever you want. And I'm going to join. I am going to say Pablo, and if there's more than one Pablo, we'll sort it out later. And hopefully you have all written that, and we move on to the next stage. Let's see if this works. Of course, I have to push buttons, which means everything can fail. Okay, first task. Each of you has thoughts about climate science and anticipatory action. What are those thoughts? Can you name one word that comes to mind? If I said animal, what animal comes to mind? You could say dog or donkey or cow or food or Black Panther. No more than 2 words and you will see that the space in between will disappear. You cannot say the word climate or science or anticipatory or action. Type number 1, number 2, and number 3. And it may want to correct your spelling, which you can accept or not. And let's give you less than a minute. This is what you think, what's in your mind, okay? Click the yellow button underneath that says submit. And I'm going to start the countdown. You have 10 seconds to submit if you haven't already. We're going to compile your thoughts. And your time is up. Now we're going to the next stage, which is, what do you think other people in this room think when thinking about climate science and anticipatory action? Maybe they think exactly the same 3 words as you do. Maybe they think something else. For every person that thinks one of those words you're right, you get 1 point. The winner of the game is the player that gets the most points, who most guesses what other people are thinking. And if you get them in the right order, you get 5 bonus points. So what do you think they are thinking? Start writing. You have a minute or less. That's my first guess. What are you thinking here? I cannot write action, so it has to be something else. And I'm going to submit, and I'm going to not give you much more time. There goes the countdown. Good luck guessing what other people think. Ta-ta-da. Do you know what other people in this room are thinking? We shall see soon. Okay, time is up. As mentioned, for every person who thought what you think they think, you're going to get a point. In the next screen, you're going to see how many points you got. So, for example, I got only 1 point. I guessed early warning, and looks like 1 other person guessed early warning. No one thought protocol. What? We're full of protocols for early warning, but I guess I was wrong. Okay, next stage. Let's compare what you actually thought with what other people thought. Let's see. Oh, forecasting was the biggest one. Urgency, adaptation, forecast, early warning, people, hard, learning, adapt, bias, inaction, prepare. But it looks like the guesses were very focused. Look at the difference. People thought that other people thought complicated, but not many people thought complicated. Isn't that interesting? Trigger, everyone thought that other people were thinking trigger, but no one is thinking trigger. Or maybe one. So with this in mind, we see that there's a gap between what we think and what we think other people think about the role of science in anticipatory action. Thank goodness there's a ton of scientists thinking about this, and they came up with the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this latest report focuses on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And we have the honor, joy, privilege of having with us my dear colleague, Erin Coughlan de Perez, Dr. Erin, who is a professor at Tufts University, a member of the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, leading our science work, and also she was a lead author for this latest IPCC report. So I'm going to pass it over to her. Erin, you can say a bit more about yourself if you want, especially your role in FPF and so on, and then we're in your hands for a bit. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pablo. Interesting to see what everyone had in mind when it came to anticipatory action. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm looking forward to an active discussion. So I will have a presentation now to go over some thoughts that I'd like to share with you, and then hopefully get your thoughts and your brainstorm about what this means for us as a community moving forward. So what can the IPCC report say about our work, and how can it spur us to be more effective and to improve what we do? So what I'm going to do is share my screen and take you through a short PowerPoint that I've put together. So the first point is just scene setting. What are we going to do today? I've got some slides for you as just an overview of what did the report say. Many of you have probably read these things or seen these things, so I'll go very quickly through that for those of you who haven't. And then I'll do a deep dive into early warning systems. In terms of terminology, the report uses early warning systems frequently not as much the word anticipatory action, but of course has actually reviewed some of our work in anticipatory action as a more holistic look at early warning systems that is reviewed in the report. And we'll go through, I've got 3 major points for you about early warning systems in the report. So first, the overview. We put together actually a cartoon summary of the report. So that's what I'll share with you right now, and you can find it online. I'm sure Pablo could actually drop the link in the chat for you. And so this is our goal of giving you a short synthesis of what does the report say of interest to the humanitarian sector. All right, the report answers one question: how bad is it? First question. Basically, it's bad. I mean, climate change is changing humanitarian crises. This was the first time that the summary for policymakers included the word humanitarian. So people are increasingly recognizing that climate change is changing our work as humanitarians, and the effects on disasters around the world are large and are very problematic for all of us everywhere. Second, climate change is already here, right? It has already disrupted the lives of billions of people. This is an unequivocal statement and recognizes the fact that we live in a changed climate, and we all live here on planet Earth under the same atmosphere, and that climate has changed, and this has already had negative impacts on a lot of people, their livelihoods, excess deaths from heat waves, etc. The bad news is that we probably knew that, but the consequences that we were anticipating are worse than we thought, and they are happening sooner than we thought. So the last iteration of this major assessment of the IPCC came out in 2014. And if you compare the graphs that were made in 2014 with the graphs that were made in this report, now released in 2022, it's a little bit shocking to see that, for example, what we thought might happen at 2 degrees of warming back in 2014, we now believe that at 2 degrees of warming, it's going to be a lot worse. For reference, we are already at 1.1 degrees of warming. And what we thought the consequences of 1.1 degrees of warming would be back in 2014 have turned out to be a lot worse than what we thought they would be. So we are, trying to update people on the urgency of this moment that we have to make big decisions. So the other point in terms of how bad is it is, of course, this question of marginalization. This appeared throughout the report. And essentially, the whole point here is that climate change doesn't act alone. So a big storm on Jupiter is not a disaster, right? How we structure our society is the big determinant of what impacts we are seeing. And marginalization in particular makes impacts worse around the world. So this was a big finding, of course, of the report. But the good news is that we spent quite a lot of time on the what to do about it question. And there is another report coming out. The 3rd installment comes out at the end of this month that is focused on mitigation, so focused on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So that will have more information about greenhouse gases. Here we focused primarily on holistic solutions that help us be more resilient to this changing climate, and also, of course, also reduce our emissions while we're doing that. First major point is that everyone everywhere can adapt. We found adaptation to climate change happening all around the world, which is very impressive. Unfortunately, what we found is that people tend to be reacting to the climate changing in very small, limited ways. And we are not seeing as much big transformational adaptation as we would expect. And then, of course, there are limits to adaptation. There are some systems, for example, warm water coral reefs, that we've pretty much hit our limit of what we could possibly do. And a lot of these ecosystems there is not much we can do. And at 1.1 degrees right now where we are, and tomorrow where we'll be, it doesn't look like these ecosystems are going to make it. And there are limits to what we could even possibly do to try to save them. So this was a sobering, an encouraging, but also a sobering point. Obviously, to get over some of these limits, we need more funding and greater impetus for action. And so this is, enabling conditions. We need, big investment in sort of not only our ability to take action, but our willingness and the political space around this. One big point that the report made that was somewhat new was this idea that responding to climate change can create new risks. So this idea of maladaptation, right? In trying to protect some people from a flood, we've seen examples where we actually make floods worse for others, usually by accident. So this is something that we should absolutely be taking into account as we work on adapting to climate change and responding to these climate risks that we're seeing. And then I guess the last point here is simply that we don't have a lot of time and we need big changes. So what does that mean? That means that we have a current urgent moment to really radically choose a climate resilient future, right? Something that is decarbonizing, but that is also protecting vulnerable people, investing in resilience, and looking at these solutions holistically with marginalized voices at the table. So this was kind of this overall package of climate resilient development pathways that we talked about in the report. So that's our cartoon overview. What I'd like to do now, given that this is the community conversation of people working in anticipatory action, is do a deep dive into what did the report say about early warning systems. So I'd love to ask all of you, there were 18 chapters on this report. There was chapter 1 was an introduction. Then there were chapters 2 through 8 were sectors. So water, food, health, cities, etc. Then chapters 9 through 15 were regions: Asia, Africa, North America, South America, etc. And then there were 3 summary chapters at the end. Makes 18. How many of these chapters do you think included early warning systems as an adaptation to climate change? We're going to put up a poll now. I think, there we go, perfect. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm not taking the poll because I know the answer.
Great, nearly everyone's filled it in. A few more. Oh, really mixed.
Oh yeah? All right, let's see. I'm excited to see
Okay,
your answer.
let's see. Here we go.
Well, I'm glad that very few people picked 0. That is encouraging. The answer, wow, this is fascinating to see the response. The answer is 18. Every single chapter mentioned early warning systems. Some more extensively than others, but it was there as an adaptation option in every single chapter. So what does this mean for us? And what I'm going to do is take you through the report, and I'm going to show you what did each of these chapters have to say about early warning systems, because I think you'll find it fascinating, and I'll try to go fast through this bit because there are 18 of them. Chapter 1, point of departure. Had early warning systems mentioned a few times, and one thing they did say was the importance of incorporating Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge in our work on early warning systems. Chapter 2 was about ecosystems, and let's see, here we go. And so they talked a lot about using forecasts to forecast stress to ecosystems. So, something about knowledge of the flying fox's physiological temperature thresholds was an example that they gave, and someone developed a heat stress forecaster using weather forecasts to identify bird nests that are at risk of extreme heat events, for example. that might sound familiar to some of the things that we're doing. Chapter 3 was about the oceans, and there were lots of really interesting early warning systems examples for the oceans. There, high resolution satellite images are often used to forecast, ocean heat events or conditions that favor microbial pathogen outbreaks. So like red tides, for example, and then people were using that information to put in public health measures or give guidance about, harvesting seafood, for example. The water chapter had some good examples of forecasting for floods, right? Reducing casualties, things that we would be very familiar with. Here we go. The food, fiber, and other ecosystem products chapter talked a bit about forecasting for drought and what might that look like for agriculture. The cities chapter had a whole section on how we need more investment in early warning systems for cities, basically saying there are lots of benefits. We have a couple examples of how this has worked well in cities using crowdsourced data collection and some other cool things, but needs more investment. We don't have enough of it for cities. Very interesting. The health chapter had some nice examples of health-related early warning systems, including vector-borne diseases, for example. So early warning systems for outbreaks of diseases, including, sub-seasonal timescales, really interesting concepts. The poverty, livelihoods, and sustainable development chapter gave some nice examples of early warning systems. They talked about Cyclone Ayla in Bangladesh and about, a whole case study on how people prepared for that, including early warning systems. And then we can move to the regional chapters. And, all of these regional chapters included early warning systems. So the Africa one gave examples of early warning systems and climate services. They specifically mentioned disaster risk reduction, but also some of these other things like social protection systems and how to make them more anticipatory. The Asia chapter had a whole case study on Ho Chi Minh City, talking about a number of resilience investments like sewer upgrades, dikes, drainage, etc., that were complemented by an early warning system for flood mitigation procedures. So, they tried to build the infrastructure as best they can, and then they had this early warning system to shut off critical electrical equipment and mechanical operating systems so that if there were to be a flood, they wouldn't get ruined. Really interesting. Australasia had a nice example of fire early warning systems in Australia. So it was a combination of heat wave and fire early warning systems. Central and South America had some nice examples of dengue early warning systems that have been working in that region. The Europe chapter talked a little bit about the evidence base around early warning systems, showing that flood defenses and early warning systems have reduced flood damages and heat-related mortality in parts of Europe. The example I have for you from North America, I found really interesting. The one example that they had was railroads that are using temperature sensors on rail tracks and setting up early warning systems for when the rails might buckle because of extreme heat. So they, have signals about when these tracks might be approaching some dangerous temperatures, and they stop the trains before they could have a potential accident. Small Islands chapter talked about, obviously, the large amount of progress that's been done in forecasting cyclones and pushing people more towards new hazards. So they want investment in early warning systems for wildfires, intense rainfall, floods, heat waves, and droughts. So that was really interesting. The key risks chapter talked about so this is one of the summary chapters. Now we've got these 3 summary chapters at the end. So the key risks chapter talked about limits to adaptation. And here they did also explain that there are limits to our ability, limits to what early warning systems can do for us. So that was very interesting. Chapter 17 was my chapter called Decision-Making Options for Managing Risk. And in this one, we did a deep dive into the concept of maladaptation. So how we, some people might not benefit. And in particular, in early warning systems, there is some evidence that if they are not implemented properly, we can leave people behind. So people who are not very connected might not receive early warnings. Marginalized groups or women or other vulnerable people sometimes don't benefit as much from the warnings. And so there was a big discussion about how we could improve what we do in early warning systems, given this talk of maladaptation. And lastly, the chapter 18 talked about climate resilient development pathways, right? These pathways forward that are full of really robust investments, not just one thing, but thoughtful pathways forward into our future. And here they, of course, mentioned early warning systems many times, and also mentioned this question of making sure we don't leave people behind. So that was my overview. What does this report say about early warning systems? That was a bunch of examples and also some considerations for you. I'd like to now spend the last few minutes talking about two major take-home messages for me that I'd like us as a community to discuss, given what was discussed in this report. And the first is this idea of unprecedented extremes. We are seeing radically different extreme events than what we've seen in the past. Things that were not possible before climate change. They were not possible in a world without this changed climate. If we are setting up early warning systems to help anticipate extreme events, what happens when something new arrives on the scene? Are we designing early warning systems, and are we designing our anticipatory action systems in such a way that can handle these new events? Or are we simply just saying, well, I remember that there were some floods in this location in the past and they looked like this, therefore we will set up some warnings in case something exactly like that happens again? If that's what we're doing, then we are not comprehensively understanding that we live in a different climate and we need to be ready for the unexpected. So of course, doing that first thing is probably good, and yeah, it's probably good that we have early warning systems for the things that we know happened in the past, but we also need to be having a conversation about what things might we expect in the future. I'd love to just take a quick pause here and turn it over. So I'm working in a consortium with a number of universities from around the world, and I wanted to, just so that I'm not the one talking the whole time, turn it over to Dr. Shampa, who I believe, Lydia, maybe you could spotlight if she puts her video on, just to give one or two comments about this idea of unprecedented extremes, because this is some of the research that she's doing in our consortium about unprecedented extremes and what that might look like. Dr. Shampa, do you want to just give us two-minute overview?
Okay, thank you, Erin. And that I can share some examples of Bangladesh, what we are seeing in working with the anticipatory actions. Like in Bangladesh, like that setting the trigger is one of the most core component of anticipatory actions. And while setting the triggers for disaster like floods, we saw that it is based on the historical data. And we see that in many places, flood basically starts before reaching the triggers, and especially for the rivers and the coastal areas of the Bangladesh. And also, like the type of the nature of the disaster is changing. Like for example, we see that now we found a very recurrent event of flooding. But the people living in that area, they are basically adapted to single flooding in a year, and for the recurrent flooding make them very vulnerable. And also one of the example I can share with you that in our climate change impact simulation, we also saw that due to the climate change, the duration of flooding is increasing. And if our field experience also shared the same example that the people are experiencing very longer flood, but they are not adapted to this type of flood, and it is the devastating to them. It make them sometimes jobless for several months, and this make them poor to very poor. Thank you.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, such a good explanation of what this could look like. And it's not just then saying, oh, we're going to have the same flood, but bigger. It's saying maybe the duration is changing, or maybe the timing, or maybe some of these other questions of compound and cascading impacts are things that we need to be anticipating. So I think these are really good examples of what this can look like. And obviously you can talk to Dr. Shanta in the conversation part of the discussion, because we have this consortium studying anticipatory action, and this is one of the things that she's been looking into. So then the other major point that I'd love to leave you with is this idea of transformation. So I think this is something that we also need to have a conversation about as a community. We found when we tried to do a review of what is happening on adaptation around the world, we did this extensive review of everything that had been published in the peer-reviewed literature on documented adaptation, including early warning systems and anticipatory action everywhere in the world. And we looked to see, were these transformational actions or were these incremental actions? So incremental actions would be like, I'm going to plant my normal crops 2 weeks earlier. Boom, done, climate change, check the box. Just kidding. Transformational actions would be things like, maybe I need to change my livelihood, or maybe we need to move, do different types of spatial planning, really like moving where we're going to be developing, or even moving, people who are living in one place might choose to live somewhere else. And so thinking about these bigger transformations, changing our own governance systems to enable access to healthcare for everyone, that can be a big transformation. So, right, so our findings were, probably unsurprisingly, that most adaptation actions that we found were in this incremental sort of like small tweak category, and we saw very little evidence of transformational adaptation pretty much around the world. So early warning systems ended up on that incremental side most of the time. Early warning systems tended to say, oh, you are living in this place, we will help you move away, the flood comes, and then we will help put you right back where you were. All set, bye. Or something like that, where early warning systems were incremental. They enabled people to pretty much keep the same system, the same livelihood, the same everything, with just a little bit of early warning and a little bit of early action on the top. What we found, if you look at the big picture of climate change with these unprecedented extremes and the fact that climate change is happening faster and stronger than we thought it would be happening, is that these little incremental tweaks that keep society the same are unlikely to be sufficient. And we need to be thinking about what kind of bigger transformational changes do we need in society to survive and thrive in a changed climate. So one question for all of us is, how can we as an anticipatory action community engage with transformation? And this doesn't mean that every action that is taken in response to an early warning needs to transform society. That would be totally unrealistic. And in some places, all you want to do is just move people out of the way during the cyclone and put them back, and it's okay. But in many cases, we might be looking at a situation where people have really marginal livelihoods, right? And drought after drought after drought is happening. And our response is simply to, just give a little bit of livestock feed and walk away. And we're not setting people up to be more resilient to the next drought or even maybe to last through the duration of the current drought. We're seeing this in East Africa. It's been quite difficult. So how can we as a community set up anticipatory action systems that don't put people back in harm's way, but actually help enable people on this longer term trajectory towards resilient systems and resilient development? So those are the 3 points from the report. 1, early warning, early action is everywhere, all over the report, happening everywhere. Really cool examples. We should think outside the box. 2, and we need to think multi-hazard, different regions, different hazards, different cool things. Thing number 2, unprecedented extremes. Are we ready? How do we be ready? Thing number 3, transformation. How can we engage with change in places and not just put people back in harm's way? So those are the thoughts for you. Pablo, over to you for the discussion part of this.
Thank you, Erin. Friends, now is when we make you work. I'm going to copy again the same link that you had before. You should be seeing a blue screen that says 90-second question and answer, part 1. Please go there, and I am going to move on straight to the next screen, which is where, if you want to stay anonymous, or you can just type your name, and you will see a place where you can write your question, your comment, your suggestion that will be offered to Erin to lead us through her answers, her reactions over the remaining time of this. Your job is to write as many good questions, comments, suggestions as you can in 90 seconds starting now. Remember to push the yellow button. You may need to scroll down. You now have only 83 seconds. As many as you can to enrich the conversation that follows. I usually have music playing here, but someone else pushes the buttons and I don't know how to do it. Here they come. Shorter is better, but if you need to write a long paragraph, you can. 60 seconds. What are your questions? What do you want to talk more about? Starting very shortly. Here they come. Wow, you're prolific. What do we want to know? What do we want to say? And what you write will be read not only by Erin, but also by others in this room. Keep it coming. You have about half a minute.
If you want to offer your own examples of good practice, I don't have all the answers, So if you want to offer suggestions or examples, that would be wonderful.
About 15 seconds, type fast. What should we talk more about? Okay, 10, 9, 8, we have 30 questions already, 7, what I'm counting, well, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and moving on. If you had a question you didn't type, it's too late. And now you're going to get to see all one at a time, a question that you can, if it makes your heart beat, a question, comment, suggestion, you click on that little heart and it means I want to talk about it. If it's interesting but not that major, you can just skip with the arrow to the next one. And let's give you a minute or so to go through several. Yeah, I'm going through this as well. Yes. Okay. Let's give you about half a minute more. Nice. Okay, let's give you 10 seconds or so. And I'm going to move on to the next state, which is where you will see everything that was shared ranked by the most resonant questions. So what we will do now is to invite Erin to scroll through that screen and pick the ones that she wants to talk about. Meanwhile, we're going to invite Lydia and the organizing team to send us into groups of about 3 or 4 people and talk for 4 or 5 minutes, no more. Each one of you can say, I'm so-and-so from this organization. That's your introduction. And then you can say, this is what I want to follow up with. This is what I want to talk more about. Keep it short, give time to everyone, and then when time is up, time is up. Have an interesting conversation. Lydia, over to you.
Great, okay. Rooms are open. You should be automatically jumping into different rooms. So I'll be here if anybody's lost. Great. Hi, Pablo. Oh, I will pause recording.
Okay, I see that people are beginning to trickle in. Welcome back. I hope you have made some new friends, reconnected with old friends, and had an interesting, extremely brief conversation about what's been happening. Erin, we are in your hands. There's, 35 questions, some more resonant than others. What do you want to talk about? You have less than 10 minutes.
I wish I had all the answers. These are great questions. What are the next steps? I mean, gosh, I'd love to ask all of you that. So I might skip the what are the next steps and leave that for the end. There are some good questions about silos. And I think that, the next 2 questions on this list have to do with breaking down silos and making this link to development. And I think there's no accident that the end of the IPCC report was called Climate Resilient Development Pathways, right? And the point here is that we need to be working across silos. So what are some good principles in that way? I think we've seen some best practices in anticipatory action work where during the planning for these kinds of events, in the anticipation part, people read local development plans and national development plans and sit down with those agencies and say, where are you guys going? Where and talk to people who might be vulnerable to a particular hazard and figure out where are they going? What are they looking for? And making that link with development. I think that's been, really going out of our way to make the link has been successful in a few cases. Encouraging development actors to also have that conversation back, maybe with the humanitarian sector, has also been successful in a few cases. There are some examples of funding mechanisms in development projects that can be triggered if there is an extreme event that happens during the project. And so engaging in those discussions with the development actors to say, well, what is it that you would do to try to protect your assets and keep moving in a certain direction? That can also maybe help us understand what kind of actions we could take just in general in terms of a humanitarian support. But I don't have all the answers, and I'd love to open it up in case other people do have some examples of working across silos and working with development actors. But I think it's something we need to prioritize 100% as a sector. I think that we are at risk of creating anticipatory action and early warnings as its own silo. And as you can see, the concept is so ubiquitous and can be used for so many things in so many transformational ways that we don't need to do that. In terms of examples of transformational early warning, early action, I find this difficult, and I would love to hear your ideas on this. I can give a few thoughts, but I don't think I have all the answers on this one. One thought is that so there have been some interesting examples of giving people cash pre-disaster that have enabled people who are then going to experience a disaster to make choices themselves, and they might make different choices than I would make if I, were anticipating what they were going to do. So this has been pioneered by the Red Cross for Crescent movement all over the world. One interesting example is that WFP has an ARC replica mechanism in Mali that paid out recently in anticipation of food insecurity because of failed harvests and things like this. So one of the interventions that they're doing with the cash is something called asset creation. So they're providing cash to people, but saying, use this cash as a group right now to determine what kind of assets you want to build so that the next time we have a drought or a poor rainy season, you will not have the same experience as last time. So I thought that was very interesting. And as I mentioned, we have this 4A's Academic Alliance on Anticipatory Action, this 4A's consortium of universities. So we will be partnering with WFP to try to study, how did this work? What did people come up with, and did it seem to be work for them? And I lost the questions. Seems like Pablo pushed some buttons, but I was trying to remember the other questions were quite similar. Does anyone want to, because then I know, Lydia, I have to turn it over to you in a minute. Does anyone want to offer any examples of where they feel like that we have been successful at working across silos, or working on transformational adaptations, or, oh, I remember. One of the other questions was how to anticipate unanticipated extremes. I think for this, we can rely on our imagination. I mean, I think that's what we have to do. Is there are some new techniques in the climate science world to write storylines, and that's what they call it. Yeah, so raise your hand if you could share an example. So essentially, using climate science, we can mock up a physically possible event that has never before happened, but we now know is possible, and work with stakeholders to write a story of what would that look like, this imaginary storm that hits your city. What happens? What are the cascading and compounding impacts? Who's vulnerable, etc. And what do we need to do in preparation for such an unprecedented event? And it's hard. It's hard to use our imagination sufficiently to really understand what that could look like. But I think that those are the kinds of contingency planning processes that we can do. And frankly, the humanitarian sector has a lot of expertise in this idea of contingency planning. So I think we have a lot of tools to bring to the table on that. So, right, that's unprecedented extremes and the role of the imagination. Did anyone have examples to offer of transformational adaptation or good work with development actors? Or Pablo, are you taking it from here?
I'm waiting for ideas, and if ideas don't come, we move on, knowing that we have to come up with ideas after this ends. Let's do this. You have 30 seconds to type, or a lifetime to come up and create. So meanwhile, thank you, Erin. Thank you for bringing humanitarian thinking to IPCC and climate science, and then bringing the science to us and creating these bridges. We're super grateful to you and your colleagues at the IPCC for this very important work, which is, it's all leading to increased, very senior level conversations about how to integrate science and anticipatory action in many, many ways. So what I invite us to do now is to revisit our activity that we used at the beginning. You can see the web site there. It's the same as before. We started by asking you what you were thinking about when thinking about anticipatory action and climate science. Now we're asking the same question, but with a caveat. What are you thinking more of about this topic now that you heard Erin share insights from the IPCC? So maybe there's something that you hadn't even thought about and now you're thinking about. Or maybe there was something that, you were thinking about, but it wasn't as prominent as it is now. So write your top 3 things that you walk away from this meeting because of learning from Erin about the IPCC report. I'm going to write this one. I'm going to write this other one. And I'm going to write this one. And I'm not too fast a typer, so I'm going to submit and start the countdown. I think you have about 10 seconds. What are you thinking now that you weren't thinking so much before, thanks to this session convened by the Anticipation Hub? Okay, time is up. We're going to skip the part where you try to guess what other people were thinking because we're running out of time. And we're going to go straight to the word cloud. On the left, what are you thinking? Transformation, big. Well done, Erin. Early warning, transformation and early warning systems, cash, hope, training to think big, paradigms, uncertainty, coordination, cash transfers, all sorts of cool things. I will leave that word there. This is the impact of this session on us. But now is just the beginning of the rest of our lives, and the climate continues to change, and all of us have a lot of work, whether you're Red Cross, WHO, academia. There are so many people here. We're all grateful to your presence. Over to Lydia to wrap us up.
Great, thank you so much, Pablo. Yeah, this was absolutely amazing, and thank you so much, Erin, for taking the time to share all of this knowledge with the Anticipatory Action community. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to share a couple of slides very quickly, just for those who may not be so familiar with all of the different exchange opportunities available through the Anticipation Hub. So just to pitch a couple of things really quickly that you mightn't be familiar with. So we've recently launched an Anticipatory Action community directory. And with this, you can find your match, find your perfect match. You can find different partners who are working in different regions on different topics, and you can search through the database. So please do go have a look at that, and I can send the link in the chat. We also have many different working groups, and I'll send the link of that as well. So please do get engaged in those. We have ones around conflict, Earth observation, monitoring and evaluation, risk financing, gender, health. One is upcoming, so please do reach out and connect with the co-chairs there. We also have our dialogue platforms, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, but we can look forward to a very exciting year of dialogue platforms this year too. And the save the dates are already out for the Africa Dialogue platform and the Global Dialogue platform. So stay tuned for those. And please do keep in the loop with our newsletter and our general updates, which you can find on the Anticipation Hub website under the News tab and the Events tab. So lots of different resources are being produced. So please do keep an eye on that. And also our social media pages are being updated. So you can find all the different news updates and resources on the Anticipation Hub there. Also, just to highlight our global map. So we do have a global map mapping out all the different anticipatory action projects that are happening all over the world. So please do go and visit that. And you can also capture different lessons learned there from a regional and country level. And yes, so I hope that you enjoyed this Anticipation Hub community conversation. So as I said at the beginning, we've just launched this series and we'd love to get your feedback. We'd love to hear from you if there's any conversations you'd like to host or people that you'd like to bring together for a discussion through the Anticipation Hub. So please do get in touch with me and I'd be very happy to facilitate that. And yeah, without further ado, we're just nearly at the top of the hour. So just to say thanks again to Dr. Erin Coughlan de Perez and to Pablo Suarez for facilitating this discussion. And we really look forward to interacting and engaging with you all going forward. And I wish you a very good rest of the day and hope to interact again soon. Thank you all for joining.